last episode of Pure Education, we looked at if humans were born to be a certain type of way or if we learn to be a certain type of way. If humans are born a certain type of way, it can't change, so we should organise society in a way that reflects as human nature. If we learn to be a type of way, then society can change. On episode 2, we're going to look at another question about what humans are like. But this time, focusing on whether humans are more individuals or collectives. No one human exists alone. It's impossible. You probably die. These distinct individuals have to exist within some form of community. Equally, a group isn't a single entity, right? That group of people is made up of separate individual people with distinct thoughts, feelings, opinions, desires, wants, personalities. So clearly you cannot have one without the other. And equally, you can't have the other without the one. Individualism and collectivism, what do they even mean? How does it affect you? Let's break it down. Welcome to Re-Educate. Before we get into it, disclaimer. I am not a teacher. I'm learning with you. I'll try and cite most of my sources, the articles and the YouTube videos in the description. If there's anything that you agree or disagree with, or you're like, I think you might have got that a little bit wrong today, and here's why, please clearly and politely, please don't harass me. I'm very sensitive. Share your thoughts, opinions, what you learn, questions you have, everything in the comments. So with that being said, first, let's break it all the way down. What is individualism? In fact, pause. What is an individual? It might seem common sense, but let's break it down.
Google defines an
individual
as a single human being distinct from a group. This comes from Latin, which was spoken in the Roman Empire to refer to atoms that can't be broken down, atoms that are indivisible. It later, during the Middle Ages, referred to a person, an individual, separate from a group.
Me, Tile, nice to meet you. You, same. Chioma, Zach, and Amit, it's multicultural over here. We're all hanging out in a group. We see ourselves as separate individuals. I'm not Amit, Amit is not me. So that is what an individual is. Individualism, however, is a belief that prioritizes the individual over the social group. So me, I'm prioritizing myself over all y'all bitches. So individualism says that we should prioritize our individual selves over the collective group. Why should we prioritize ourselves?
What are the benefits of individualism?
So individualism usually wants to protect our freedoms to do whatever we want and not have anyone stop us and control us, our rights to do and be whatever the fuck we want, ownership, to own whatever the fuck we want. I guess I have like a million pairs of glasses. Consumerism got me there. Individualism says that it's my individual right to say this is mine and no one can come and steal it from me because I'm an individual with freedom, rights, and ownership rights. Yeah. The equivalency of don't tell me what to do, mum. This all pretty much seems like yeah, each individual human is distinct and separate. And me and Bob have the right to do whatever the fuck we want. But mate, you have to understand that this idea that we humans are all separate individuals and we all each have the right to do whatever the hell we want to do above the group, it's not always been the prevalent thought in history. For example, let's go back 1,000 years. Fucking hell, it's a long time. 1,000 years ago, according to what I understood, people didn't really conceive of themselves as individuals at first with the rights to do whatever they wanted to do. Obviously, I think they saw themselves as like individuals distinct from their peers, but it didn't seem like that was the primary way of thinking about yourself as individual first, deserving of rights over the collective body. These humans 1,000 years ago lived in a system different to the one that we have now. So the system 1,000 years ago was called feudalism. What is feudalism? Right, before we get into what feudalism is, you need to understand that the more you look into something, the more complicated it gets. But it's not so complicated that you can't understand it. It just means there's a lot of different nuances that you might have to jot down. It's important to note, from my little research, I found out that a lot of historians nowadays are kind of a bit sus about the term feudalism. But why? Why are they sus? They're kind of sus because the term feudalism has been used as a word to describe a very broad, wide-ranging different structures. So words are really important when we refer to things. And also when we refer to ideas or concepts, it's important to be clear about what words mean and what they're referring to. So this is branching out to a study called etymology, understanding the origins of words. Where do words come from? And how has the meaning of certain words changed over time? The word is a tool to how we refer to things. I find it really interesting, but that's where it branches off to. So the word feudalism broadly describes something, but what is the thing that it's broadly describing? So here's what I understand a feudal system to be. Feudalism. Feudalism is a way that humans organize themselves roughly between
1000 AD to 1500 AD, after the collapse of the Roman Empire. In feudalism, these humans lived in a different system to the one we have now, with a different way of distributing power, aka politics, a different way of creating and distributing the stuff that we made and the things that we do for one another, aka economics, and a different story and belief system that they bought into that convinced them to live life in this way, aka religion and mythology.
It's interesting. Never thought I'd be looking up the Roman Empire to understand it, but here I am. How did the people operating under feudalism roughly organize themselves? So the feudal system organized themselves in a hierarchy, a social rank. You're up there, you're getting stuff, right? You're down here, it's not that great. So the main economic exchange, and by economy, we mean what people make, or what people do, and how they swap those things. The main economic exchange was land, military protection, and services. And by services, an example would be farming, toiling the land to make food so that we can eat and survive.
For example, person A farms and hands over the wheat in exchange for person B's military protection.
So at the top of the feudal system was the king. The king owned all of the land, right? Why? He owns it, so shut your gob. He would give the land, otherwise known as fiefs, he would give the land to the bougie second-ranking people. These lot are known as noble lords, the lords of the land, landlords. Oh. So the king would give the land to the noble lords. But why is he giving them land for? Is he just being nice? No. He's giving them land in exchange for these lords' loyalty. The king can't be everywhere in order to ensure everything runs according to what he thinks is right. So he's giving them land in exchange for their loyalty and their duty to organize the lower ranks. And also when war breaks out, which it kind of did a lot, they are in charge of finding knights and people who are going to fight. Sometimes, I think, the king and some of the lords actually even went to fight themselves. They should bring that back. Go on, Charles. Anyone who benefited from the king giving them land was called a vassal. A vassal means someone who's been given land in exchange for loyalty. So these lords, in turn, will give a smaller parcel of land to knights. Why are they giving a small parcel of land to knights? They're giving it to knights in exchange for their loyalty and their duty to fight and protect the kingdom. Knighthood also was a way of life. It wasn't just fighting. They had to abide by the church and they had a duty to chivalry. That's where that comes from. Men need to be chivalrous. Knights had a duty to be chivalrous and protect the women and protect the land, etc. That's the etymology of that. So the knights are like, yeah, cool, I'll take this land and I'll fight when war comes. So the knights then would give some of their land to their vassals. These people were bailiffs, stewards, and reeves. Why is the knight giving land to those people? In exchange for the land, these lot, under the knights, have the duty to oversee the povos, right at the bottom. So they have to make sure the povos are doing their job, aka the peasants. Some peasants were free, and if they're not free, they're called serfs. Serfs, aka who are basically slaves that can't be sold separately to the land. Unlike other types of slavery, serfs were basically like a tree, a very hard-working tree, because they came with the land. That's why they were called serfs instead of slaves. And 90% of people in those feudal structures were the povos, right at the bottom, the serfs and the peasants. But why were they given land? What's it in exchange for? These peasants made the goods, baby. They farmed the stuff, they toiled the land, they created the things, the food and the stuff, clothes and all that kind of stuff. This social rank was maintained by a culture of duty and religion. So that was their duty in exchange for land, to be able to live off their small plot of land, in exchange for military protection. But some serfs also had no choice but to also fight in the war if they were called to. So what the fuck is the exchange, bruh? I'm still gonna have to fight and maybe die? What is the point? Why will I agree to this if I still have to make all the shit and then fight and die? That's where the church comes in. Church. The church reinforced the belief in the system and in the collective duty. Hey, poor baby boo, you're not happy with this and you want to rebel against the system? But this is just where you belong for the good of society, you little silly Billy. The king deserves his spot because, obviously, God, divine rights of kings, you know how it goes. Toil the land, go fight, and shut your gob. Thank you. The church was also a very powerful and rich institution at that time. So this created a strong sense of obligation and duty amongst those who participated in feudalism. And that is roughly what feudalism refers to. Does that make sense? Comment below if it makes sense. Things to keep in mind. Although in feudal systems, people largely directly exchange stuff like, I'm gonna farm, you're gonna give me land, or I'm gonna farm and you're gonna protect me by doing military service. Money and coins still also existed during this period of time as a symbol of value. It's useful here, even if you think you know what money is, to Google what the fuck is money and how did it come about and what are banks? I'm still in the process of learning this myself, especially in detail. But just keep in mind, money existed even 1,000 years ago. It just wasn't the primary middleman when it comes to exchanging values of stuff. Another thing to note, most of the population were in feudal hierarchy systems, but a small percentage, I think it was 10% I saw on this YouTube channel, lived in a town away from the feudal system. These towns used to be owned by nobles who were the second bougie people on the pyramid scheme. The townspeople, who were a mixture of serfs who ran away and free peasants who moved to the town, got more skills, created guilds. What is a guild? A guild is basically when people of the similar skills come together and say, oh, we're going to charge similar prices and we're going to protect each other and we're going to make sure that what we make is of good standard. For example, candle makers make a guild and they say, we are candle makers. If you want to buy from all of us, this is the standard that we're setting. Kind of like a trade union, I think. And these guilds, made up of free peasants and runaway serfs, were increasing in trade, especially long distance trade with people from far away. And they got money, right? And money gave them value and power. And they used that power in the towns to bargain control over the lands from the feudal powers. And eventually the feudal powers gave some control to those townspeople. Dig into it if you want to know specifics. It is quite interesting. The reason why we're going in depth into what feudalism is because it's important to put into context how we organize ourselves now. Because sometimes if you don't look into history, you think it's always been this way. You know, we've always traded this way. We've always organized power and distributed power in this way, when that is not true. It was different before, it became this, and this can be different, but we need to understand what has been. So now we understand what feudalism is, but we're not in a feudal system anymore. The structure is arguably different. So how did we end up here? Why don't we still live in a feudal system? Again, there's a lot of reasons, but I'm just going to mention one or two. One reason was a plague. Loads of people died. This was called the Black Death. And so why did a lot of people dying during this plague help change the feudal system? Well, one, a lot of serfs died. The 90%ers of the regular people farming the land died. Why did them dying change the system? One, it created chaos. So a lot of serfs were running away from feudal countryside manors and lands and going to towns where they thought it would be safer. So that was undermining the feudal system because people were running away. And two, with less serfs around, with less people who were farming the land to make the goods that is necessary to keep the system going, the serfs that did stay had more power. They now could say, hey, if you want me to farm, which you need me to farm, you're going to have to give me a wage labour, so pay me, bitch, and give me some power and value, or better working conditions. This was then popularising wage labour within the feudal system and also in the towns where wage labour was also occurring. So changing the system of duties that was the main exchange between the feudal hierarchies into something more transactional that we know now. Another reason, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around, was one of the kings came up with this document called the Magna Carta. That's not just a Jay-Z song, it's in history. So the Magna Carta, what is it? I understand is that it was a document that gave some powers from the monarchy to the nobles, because the nobles were beefing the monarchy for power struggles. Eventually, as time passed, this document was used as a basis to give the peasants power. And also, kings at that time were buying soldiers. They weren't just relying on the duties of the nobility to get them knights and soldiers and peasants who can fight in the war. They were actually just paying soldiers to say, fight for me. So that weakened that feudal duty bonds in that system. The feudal system was kind of like a duty-based value system. This system that we're in now, we don't do things because it's just like, it's my duty, it's my value. No, we do things because it's pay me, bitch. But obviously, as I said, money was still occurring in that system too. Does that make sense? Cool. So as feudalism and feudal ties were declining and collapsing, a new human way of organising was being sprung. So humans started to think of different ideas from the feudal system on how things can be made and distributed and how services can be enacted and distributed, aka economics, on how power should be distributed, aka politics. If it's not the king, what should it be? And also theories on how we humans should think of ourselves and also our external world, aka philosophy, sciences, and theology. These all developed in the period as feudalism was collapsing to the period of Enlightenment. Right, so how does this connect to the larger picture of individualism versus collectivism? So as we've said, during the feudal system, people didn't really conceive of themselves as individuals with rights and freedoms to do whatever they want. They probably saw themselves as individuals separate to their peers, but they saw themselves also as a collective with different duties. So when this collapsed, it gave rise to the new ideas. So what were those new ideas? Individualism was one. Oh no, history is multifaceted. We're talking currently about Western ideology. How did their history unfold to lead to where we are now, which has now become a global imported idea. And loads of different parts of the world have their different histories, which hopefully we'll also get to explore. As we said, collapse of feudalism. How are we going to organise ourselves if we're not doing this hierarchy king shit? There were a bunch of thinkers, people who just thought and wrote books about their ideas, how we should organise ourselves now. To throw out some names, a guy called Hobbes, a guy called Rousseau, a guy called Locke, a guy called Bentham, a guy called Adam Smith, guy. These are a list of like a bunch of thinkers that I'm trying to understand the order of where they come and what they say. But I think a key thinker here is a guy called Hobbes. He lived during the English Civil War. So the monarchy was fighting for power against the parliamentarians. During this period of unrest and instability, he actually even says that his mother gave birth to twins, him and Fear. I think Hobbes had a bit of anxiety. Basically, my man Hobbes wanted to understand how to organise society. He came up with this book called Leviathan, which is a political philosophy book, right? Thinking, how can we distribute power? Let's think about it. Quick summary, he was inspired by, for example, Galileo, who tried to approach understanding things by dissecting it. So he tried to understand what humans are like by dissecting it, by dissecting this theory of man. What is man like? And he came to the idea that in a state of nature is where there's no control, no rule, you just do whatever, everyone just does whatever they want, complete freedom. He said in the state of nature, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. So aka quite shit. So Hobbes got to this idea of what he thinks human nature is like through observation. So what was his observation? He had a couple observations, right? One was he thinks humans do things based on desire or aversion. They move towards something or they move away from something, right? And this drives our behavior. This drives our decisions. According to what I've learned, he doesn't actually think humans are inherently evil. Like they don't want to cause harm necessarily, but there is a structural account for why humans are in conflict and do evil. What does that mean? He thinks that because one, he thinks all humans are equal. Remember, this wasn't the case in feudal times. They didn't think all humans were born equal necessarily then. The monarchy and the structure of feudalism didn't account for that. Whereas Hobbes is theorizing and he thinks all humans are born equal. He's rejecting that feudal premise. So if everyone's born equal according to Hobbes, each human individually want to go after what we want. So if we all want the apple, I'm going to go after it, Susan's going to go after it, and Amit's going to go after it, right? For our individual selves. Hobbes believes humans are inherently selfish or self-interested primarily. So he doesn't think we'll all work together to get the apple and share it. He thinks that no, we would want to pursue our own interests. If I get it, you can't get it. If I get the apple, you can't get the apple. So there's naturally competition, especially if everyone is free, everyone is equal. Maybe we won't be constantly fighting over apples and shit, but if we are all free and we all have our ability to go after our desires and our survival, there'll be a natural, constant sense of insecurity. You never know when someone might turn on you in order to get for their survival. You'd be in a natural, anxious position. Remember, he's a fearful guy. He's got anxiety. Even if we're not immediately fighting one another for stuff, we wouldn't feel safe that someone isn't going to come, overpower us, and take our stuff for their own safety. Because they're individuals who are selfish. We're all individuals who are selfish. So unless we have an authority that guarantees equality of man and also the safety that no one can overpower the other. Does that make sense? This authority can settle disputes and try to guarantee safety. For a modern day example of this is the law and the judicial system and the police, right? They have this sort of like all-encompassing power over us to ensure our safety. Well, that's what they're meant to do. Anyway, so Hobbes kind of came up with this idea of social contract theory. And I know that Rousseau is another thinker that builds on this, but I haven't read up on what he thinks, so I'm going to do that after this video. But that's just an example of how individualism and this culture of individual self-interested actions have become the foundational theory of how we go about living now is based on these theorists that thought then, right? Based on this transitional history from feudalism to modernity, right? There's so much more to go into that I am still learning and I probably haven't mentioned yet. That was just a glimmer into understanding how previously we might not have seen ourselves as individuals with rights and whatnot. And now we see ourselves as individuals who deserve the rights and freedoms to be whatever we want, to own whatever we want, dress how we want, you know. And this idea of human rights that we have prevalent in nearly a global society, right? Think of the UN, they try to ensure human rights. There's so much more I want to say, but I have to do more research myself. So individualism as a concept is now something that we prioritize as a value especially in England, and the UK. I'm not sure about everywhere, but in most parts of the world, right? So what is collectivism? I'm not going to go too into what collectivism is. As I said, we're trying to understand what capitalism is. So capitalism is a system that is propped up by this idea of individualism. So this month of March, we're learning capitalism. Next month, we'll try and learn socialism. So hopefully then we'll discuss more in depth what collectivism implies. And it's funny because culturally, like my Nigerian parents, and I know this is somewhat similar in Asian communities and families, when I was fighting against my parents being like, I have my values, I should do whatever I want, it's my human rights, they kind of mocked me a little, or just being like, oh, your human rights, yeah. And I think it's funny now looking into this, seeing how I'm a product of my society. In Nigerian societies, probably years ago, it was more collectivist of we before I, and I am like a product of I before we. I see individualism as somewhat useful as a term, obviously, because we don't want a collective totalitarian or a collective body telling us what to do and be. We value this idea that like I should have some rights to express myself, especially as an artist. I would hate to live in a society where my expression was limited. But does collectivism have to squander individualism, or is there a middle ground that we can strike? I guess that's the question. Anyway, for now, I hope this was helpful in understanding individualism and understanding the history of feudalism and how these concepts sort of connect together. Let me know if it was helpful in the comments. Let me know if there are any questions or any corrections or anything else. I'll put all the links below, and hopefully this is helpful. I was going to do another video on pre-education about what humans are like. Are they self-interested or cooperative? But I don't think I'll have enough time to do that. Maybe in the future. So the next video will be on re-education, not pre-education, and I will be going through the core materials for the month of March and breaking it down in just my language. You know what I mean? So I hope this helps, and I'll see you in the next video of re-education. Bye!